Welcome to Tokenverse podcast series where we bring together creators, blockchain specialists, investors, intellectuals, and experts to brainstorm the potential and future of Web3 technologies. This production is brought to you by DoinGud, an NFT marketplace empowering creators and connecting people who want to do good across the world. In today's episode, we're going to discuss the subject of storing NFTs for long-term sustainability. And we're very lucky to have very impressive guests today. We're going to start with Molly Mackinlay, who is a developer, and she leads protocol design and development for IPFS project, the Filecoin network, Lotus implementation, and LIBP. Sorry, Molly, you have to.
I get intro.
And are you actually developer? Are you actually developer?
So I'm the engineering manager and product lead for these areas. So I lead the engineering teams that are working on this at Protocol Labs, but it's also they're massive open source communities. So there's a lot of people who work on them.
Fantastic. Thank you for helping me out here. But there is an interesting fact about Molly, which is not so tech related. Well, you might think Molly is an author, and this is because she was actually a product manager for Google Books, and as a consequence of that, she actually published her own book. So that's why lots of people actually don't even confuse her as a developer, but actually a writer. So that's really interesting. Next, we've got a journalist, Brady, who is writing for CoinDesk and basically generally reporting on cryptocurrency and blockchain industry. And during the pandemic, Brady developed a new hobby or a skill, which is card tricks. Is that true, Brady? How did you come around to this?
Card shuffling. It's just sort of fancy card shuffling. It's just playing with cards in fancy ways. I don't really know. There's a bunch of YouTube videos on it, and I can spin a pin around my finger too. So, it's just fun to have little fidget things.
Fantastico. Thank you so much. And finally, we have Nikita Kudryavtsev, who is a full stack Web3 engineer and is representing DoinGud team. And Nikita also has a quite quirky fact about himself, which is including a tweet. Nikita, would you be able to say it here, because I'm worried I'm going to mess it up again?
Yeah, it's just I realized that my NFT journey so far has been starting with ENS domain register, my nickname, and then setting up position at liquidity management, liquidity at Uniswap, and finally actually buying some art, which happened only last weekend. So,
well, fantastic! Thank you so much for this. My name is Anya Pula-Majczak. I'm a journalist and film producer. And the interesting fact about myself, I can share that before talking to the guys like you, I used to interview mostly film stars and celebrities. And one of my biggest faux pas was the night when I told Daniel Craig told me that I think that he's stupid because of the way I was interviewing him. So I'm hoping that nothing like this is going to happen here. You guys are much more smarter than me. So I hope you will not have this impression here. Anyway, let's get to the subject. And we're going to talk about the storage of NFTs. And maybe Brady, could you explain what is actually the question of NFT storage?
Sure. I think when NFTs kind of popped off, people sort of came to understand them as these things that existed on Ethereum. And then there was some surprise when folks realized that the content itself doesn't exist on Ethereum. Usually someone will throw a usually in here, but the truth is I doubt any of it does, or if it is, it's like 0.00001% that's actually stored on Ethereum. So it's basically none. And really what you have is the NFT on Ethereum is a receipt, a proof of ownership, which is, just like any kind of receipt that you get in the world. It just happens to exist in the blockchain. The question is whether or not the thing that receipt points to will reliably exist over time. And that's something that I wrote about for CoinDesk a little while back that people found pretty interesting. So, yeah.
Fantastic. And so basically, there is a difference, as I understand, of storing the tokens and storing the actual creations, right?
Right. Yep.
Right. And Molly, is that actually a problem?
So really, when you think of an NFT or like and we'll imagine maybe a piece of art for this example, but it could be many different things. The ES domain, as Nikita was mentioning, it could be all sorts of different stuff. But like if you're imagining an NFT as a piece of art or a digital piece of artwork, you have the image itself that represents the NFT. You have the metadata about the NFT that defines like who the owner is right now and all of that other information. And then there's the smart contract that actually lives on the Ethereum blockchain that is doing kind of the mechanics of kind of modifying and moving that NFT around in time. And so there's kind of two key pieces here, as Brady was saying, that don't live directly on the Ethereum blockchain. There's the metadata, and then there's the image itself. And the really important thing when doing that is you want to make sure that as you reference that information, that you can keep it accessible in a decentralized way and do so reliably over time. People were definitely having some challenges in the early days of NFTs where they were just throwing all of these images and all of this metadata on centralized servers that were, say, run by one particular company, or might mutably change over time, weren't reliable. And that creates all sorts of challenges of like, how do you prove that the data is going to continue being around so that if you sold a piece of artwork for a chunk of Ethereum, that you can still access and view and transact around that NFT long-term into the future. And so that's one reason why people use technology like IPFS and Filecoin. IPFS allows you to do kind of that immutable content address so that the metadata file or the image itself always is going to have a persistent link to it that anyone can help host. And so an important thing there is to make sure it actually sticks around, for which they use things like pinning services or Filecoin as a decentralized storage network to incentivize nodes to hold on to that data long into the future, so that if any central particular entity who minted it goes away in time, many other nodes are still available to keep hosting and sending that content to people who want to view it. And so definitely there was a challenge back in the day, and that we've been kind of iterating from a best practices and infrastructure perspective to make sure that kind of all NFTs follow a really safe, secure set of best practices to avoid that going forward.
And just to spell it out slightly more, like within the NFT standard, at least on Ethereum, which is the main one most people use, there's a field in the NFT, the token URI field, that just has an address that points to the content. And so, what Molly's saying is if that address is, if it's bradydale.com/neatart.jpg, you're all well and good as long as I keep my website up, but I'm not going to live forever, and it probably isn't going to be paid for forever. And so, when I go away, that URL will be gone. And then even if you kept a copy of, neatart.jpg, how can you prove that was the one, when it's obviously going to be worth tons because it's from me, that is the original one that you own, so you need something that can stick around for a long time. So to be logged in that URI field.
Yeah, and there was actually someone made a really great demonstration of how important it is to have an immutable address, that they did this kind of example where they minted all of these NFTs and then they changed out the image from, I forget what it was at first, but they changed it to images of rugs, which created the term rug pull, which is super common in the NFT space as well, where like you don't want this image that you pay a lot for, that you have a digital receipt, to suddenly change to be a different work of art or something else from what you paid. And so you want to make sure that you have an immutable link, a content address, kind of in that metadata field, so that it doesn't change out from underneath you as the owner.
And protocols like Filecoin are also like Arweave also have neat features where you can create a cryptographic hash of a thing to sort of prove the thing is the thing. And you could also easily log that in the metadata of an NFT. I don't think that's as common yet, but there's nothing stopping folks from adding that to the smart contract and doing it. And then you kind of have double proof. So even if there was a copy that was kept somewhere else, your original copy has disappeared, you could still prove it was the thing as long as the file hadn't been modified in any way. And so that's also a good backup or sort of, hand-in-hand safeguard to add.
Yeah, at least in Filecoin land, we kind of think about kind of taking the two apart, where like IPFS does the content addressing bit, and it does so across any sort of different persistence mechanism you'd like. But IPFS does that kind of like secure, self-describing, immutable content address piece. And then you can work with many different decentralized storage networks in order to provide that content and persist it over time. And Filecoin has the really nice benefit that you can actually see those validated proofs over time, where you can see from the contract perspective, yes, this data is still being proved for this particular NFT, and I can validate it, see the record immutably in the Filecoin blockchain, which some decentralized storage networks have and some don't.
Mm-hmm. So I understand the most popular solutions out there are IPFS and then URL. And now, Nikita, from your perspective as a developer, how many of the platforms are using, which solution, and what would be ideal situation?
I mean, I'm not quite sure like what everyone like individually all the platforms are using under the hood, but it seems that most of the hashes, as Brady has pointed out, basically the constant they can call from the contract, or the owner can change. So it's a token URI. It's basically most of them are pointing to IPFS hashes. So the question is, because IPFS, it works the way that the data that lives that is being pointed at, it's basically somebody has to pin it to basically somebody has to spin up a node, an IPFS node, and then store that data, image, or whatever, and pin it there. So as soon as the pinner provider is disappears, or maybe it's offline or anything, and nobody else has basically the data hasn't propagated to the network to other nodes, and they haven't cached it or they haven't pinned it, they're not interested into this. Basically, that thing will disappear. So I think for the sustainability question part, it's important to basically to align the incentivization of maintaining the data over the time. So basically, that's where I think the Filecoin was ideological invention is that to incentivize people to maintain it over the period of time. So basically, especially with the very important data for the humanity, to make it propagate across the as far as you can reach out. So that if one node fails, you'll still have some information available. Basically, maybe how to create a combustion engine. So that way you are protected against data unavailability. So
I would say a lot of people right now are using
a
lot of different persistence mechanisms, which is great. Like today, you want resiliency, right? You want to make sure that no matter what happens, that this NFT that you're paying for sticks around. And so frequently, at least the NFT ecosystems that we've worked with are using many different solutions in order to have extra redundancy. So they run their own IPFS cluster node, or they pay an IPFS pinning provider like Pinata or Infura or something to host the content, but they also store it in Filecoin with miners around the world who are providing that storage and doing it over time. Maybe they also run it in some AWS hardware somewhere. They put this data in many different places. And the really cool thing about IPFS is it doesn't matter where the data is stored. IPFS can kind of multiplex across them and have any one of those copies provide that resiliency. So why not put it in as many different storage protocols as you can to really up the redundancy there right now?
And the nice thing about cryptographic hashing is, if you're a really advanced NFT collector, if you're putting a lot of money into this, you can even keep a copy yourself, and the system will be able to verify that that's legit. You can just have a hard drive that you keep in a safe place that just, as long as it's cryptographically hashed, the system can be like, yep, this is the thing. So that's a pretty neat option. I hope that guy who bought the Beeple thing for $69 million has his own copy and has logged that carefully.
Totally.
If someone
was just add that,
go on, Nikita.
Yeah, the last point is I think you must keep the medium on your local device or your own. It's like a must-have, unless basically same with the Ethereum node or anything like that. To be sure that the state is truth, it's best to have your own private key locally. That's what I'm saying for the wallet access. It's same with the media. So just to adjust it, basically, I think that if you want to own something like as Beeple art, or just save it on your computer as maybe, then you can upload it to IPFS and and then point the contract to that hash. But if you don't have it or physically duplicate it on hard disk drive and the computer, then you are nobody else will worry about storing it for you.
Yeah, I make the parallel that a decentralized solution enables every user to have agency over bringing the data to the network, whereas a centralized solution puts that control and ownership of what data can and can't be in the network in the hands of the very few. And so, you as an NFT holder have more agency over making sure that your data sticks around if it's on a solution that enables you to help provide it back to the network, instead of say, you have to trust one particular group's infrastructure, and if that goes down, your SOL, you can't actually participate and validate that content is going to stick around from in all sorts of resilient cases.
That's quite eye-opening that in case of quite a few, NFT platforms, sometimes the collectors might buy an NFT and they're not fully aware that they don't actually have this full ownership then that NFT technology is promising. Brady, how many collectors do you think are, aware of this?
I think now it's, especially if you're spending real money on it, I think the awareness is growing. But certainly when the NFT boom started earlier this year, I don't think people knew. There was a cool bot on Twitter. I think it was at Check My NFT, but that was their whole thing, is they would just you could shoot an NFT to them and they would tell you how safe it was. And of course it wasn't a perfect system. There's a variety of options out there and they didn't pretend to be perfect, but they were trying to sort of raise awareness about that. So I think it is getting better, but we still don't, I could be getting ahead of us here, but I've written an op-ed about this at one point too. I do think the industry, I think we're still at a point where everyone in the industry is trying to say, we've solved this, so use our thing, which I understand, but I do sort of think everyone would be better off if all of the parties came together and agreed upon just some standard best practices, and then across every place that NFTs are stored, every place they're sold, if there was kind of a good housekeeping seal on NFTs, something that said this is stored reliably, this uses cryptographic hashing, you can have redundancies easily, that kind of thing, whatever it was everyone agreed on. I think that's a thing that should happen, and that would be good for the whole industry. And that really hasn't happened yet. You do see things like certain sites will indicate, they'll make it clear this is on IPFS or this is on Arweave or whatever, which is good, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they've sort of looked at all the different facets of this storage issue, and there's isn't one standard, and that could be confusing for folks who are just like, if they know what Arweave is, or they know what IPFS is, or they know what storage is, but they don't know the other ones, just like if there was one thing that people could point to and be like, this is reliable, I think that would be helpful. But I don't think that conversation has really started yet. At least I don't know that it has. So I feel like that's what should happen next.
Yeah, kind of as Nikita was saying, like for at least the large amount of the NFT marketplace that uses IPFS for that content addressing bit, we did put up practices for how to use IPFS with NFTs, wanting to make sure that was super reliable and everyone was following best practices. But I think the piece you're getting at is from the storage perspective, not just the addressing perspective, making sure we set best practices there as well, of say, working across multiple storage providing solutions, making sure that you're redundant in multiple different reasons, and having a sense of like, what is your threat model really that you're defending the NFT against. There's a lot of groups that have kind of come together to there was a great conversation that Rarible organized between a lot of different groups talking about some of those best practices on using IPFS, using multiple different ways to back up your data so that any one of those can kind of serve the NFT to any user. But I think from a UI perspective or a standard perspective, it's something that's like more consortium agreement, more so than like something that's really standardized as a best practice.
Yeah, I mean, that's how things like certified organic and et cetera work. Everybody just, those are private parties that come together and they agree on a thing, and people join an organization, and, so I hope that comes to the NFT world at some point. I think it makes sense. It would be good for everyone, but yeah.
Yeah, and sorry, again, I'm interrupting.
Yeah, go on, Nikita.
Okay, I was just prior to this talk, I was actually doing some thought experiment regarding a recent purchase of the Sir Berners-Lee source code of www. So I was thinking how it should be basically who should be owning it and how would they make sure that is persistent over time. So I was thinking that should be some sort of formal DAO that would have a multi-signature to change the hash they're pointing to. Then we should have some token that would incentivize basically IPFS or Filecoin, all the providers of the storage, to store it in decentralized manner over like basically put some money into making sure that that's as many people are storing for as long time as possible, for example, for like 100 years or whatever, and sharing across multiple parties. And yeah, and maybe that will be in the next part. I'll be talking about ceramic, but yeah, I think that's I'm running a little bit forward here.
Yeah, I mean that's an idea that like we've talked about. I like to colloquially call it like data DAOs, where you have a DAO that's helping incentivize a piece of data exist long term, and kind of we're doing this hackily already, right? Where institutions care about, or some individual cares about data persisting, and they put resources and energy towards making sure that data persists in the network. And so you have all sorts of like pinning services and other ways to do this today, but it hasn't quite landed on chain into like a storage contract sort of thing where you can have, you know, a DAO sort of endowment or resources that are going to go towards making sure data exists in the long term. You could imagine also having that data kind of contribute back to its own resources. If, say, people pay to use that data, then it could contribute back to the resources to persist that data long term. How cool would that be? It's like literally an area that we're working on kind of engineering solutions around it today. It's like a little bit of the ways out. It'll be a lot easier once there's smart contracts on Filecoin to actually do more bridging between, say, like Ethereum and Filecoin to kind of have a contract self-describe engineering deals over time to ensure it persists. But yeah, I think that sort of thing could actually hit what Brady was asking for as well, of like, you know, if you can literally have a smart contract that describes how to do sustainable storage, that could be like a pretty easy check mark that works across these many different folks who might want to take advantage of it.
But now there's a question of how I actually introduce these best practices or this for housekeeping and everything into, you know, like the wider industry. So is the way of creating some kind of like watchdog or even like some going into regulation, or do you think it should happen more organically?
Yeah, I think it's organic. I think it's an easy thing for the industry to do together. The obvious entities who should be leading the charge on this are the marketplaces. You know, like there should be, you know, all the marketplaces should just come together and agree on some bug that they'll stick on listings that meet some kind of standard, and then come up with a standard and get feedback from other players. But they're the place where people get these things. That's where the education needs to happen. And yeah, I don't think there's any need for regulators to step in. I think this can totally be done in the private sector. They just need to decide to make it a priority. And again, it's just one of those things where it's a young industry, and you know, I don't think marketplaces don't want to come together and say that, like, you know, we have a feature that another marketplace also has, and it's a common feature, so there's no competitive advantage. They want to say, like, our marketplace is better if we do this thing this way, so only use us, right? Which I just can't help but think is a short-sighted viewpoint. You know, supermarkets aren't freaked out that that fruit is certified organic, and marketplaces shouldn't be freaked out that NFTs are certified reliable, right? But they're the ones who need to post that little bug, and so I think they're the ones who should probably take the lead on making it happen.
But then there is still a number of NFT marketplaces who are using URL, right, for storing the actual media. So I was just wondering, like, of course, we don't know where are all these tags pointing to, but I'm just wondering what is the situation? Are the big all the biggest marketplaces, are they actually, like, you know, using IPFS and kind of like are heading towards the most cutting edge solutions, or are there some platforms who actually, I don't know, are they lazy or is just comfortable to use the simpler solution, which actually is not so, you know, great for the whole industry?
I would say they're working on it. We've definitely been working with a lot of the folks who started out in the early days using, you know, their own server and just throwing images there because it was easy, because, like, you know, it was an easy way to get started, But then now that there's much more visibility into this, much better best practices being put forth by the entire industry. For example, we worked with OpenSea like a couple of weeks ago in order to have them kind of move on to using IPFS and Filecoin with their like metadata freeze feature. And so there's a lot of those groups who started out in the early days using centralized solutions that are now migrating to like best practices that the kind of industry has settled on. And like, yeah, I also want to plus one Brady's other thing, like we are working, like the marketplaces are sort of converging on these overall best practices. And I think it would be really useful to like just make it not a differentiated thing, but something that we can 100% rely on the entire works of art happening in kind of the NFT space to back it up. And I think there's a number of groups kind of pitching in to make that happen, but better to just do it really systematized.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing to just kick in there is there's another stakeholder in this space that we haven't talked about that your question made me think of, Anna. There's also more and more there's a separate entity. Sometimes they're the same, but there's the companies that do the minting, right? So there's some companies you just go to help you make the thing, and then they don't sell it. Sometimes they do both, like Rarible does both. But so that's another entity in play now that was less in existence early on. But if you have an idea for something but you don't know how to technically do it, there's a variety of places you can go to that will help you make the NFT. So that's also another layer in which to deal with the storage question.
But as it maybe summarize, I think the market itself would basically resolve this question of standards, and because people would then, if somebody fails, they will see that that solution wasn't sustainable, and they will migrate to the most they would see basically the best or the optimal solution. So here I believe the market will basically not marketplace it, but the market itself with the participants will organize so that, because they're incentivized to know that their media or the purchase, they spend now quite a lot of money being traded on NFTs. So they would be willing to spend more time, more research, more money will get into research, how to basically what solutions are the best. And I think that's just a question of time. If you're right.
Well, that model sort of relies on we just wait for black swans to happen and then fix them, right? So I don't know if that's the best approach for consumers. And if you look at the kind of the leader in the marketplace right now is Flow, and Flow does a lot of great stuff, but it's pretty centralized, right? So if a big disaster comes to Flow, that's going to be bad for like a lot of people. And I guess I just would hope the industry, since this is such an obvious problem we can all see, just like get ahead of it, like how hard is it to get ahead of it? But I mean, you're right. If someone has a disaster, that'll hurt them over time, but like, why not just prevent the disaster if it's an easily preventable disaster?
Yeah, that was just as an example, but I think there were smaller events that will still people do research, and they'll be like, okay, like some platform, I don't want to call any names, but their storage just on there, they have IPFS local node that don't propagate, that it's only copied once, or that it's only the database there. The endpoint is pointing to their IP, like their server, like I don't know. So that's not a black swan event. I mean, that would be like.
I think the sort of stuff that helps you audit across, again, set in place best practices, agree on them as an industry, and then audit and give check marks. There's actually a great spreadsheet that I was staring at the other day that had like all of the different NFT marketplaces and minting solutions and kind of what they used for like addressing and persistence and all sorts of different stuff. And someone had just created it and posted it on Twitter, which was super useful for you to like look at and compare and contrast in those forms of like kind of socially calling out like there's an opportunity for groups to kind of onboard onto kind of more agreed upon best practices, kind of like how Check My NFT was trying to do it, or just giving you visibility into where to go do the legwork. Like we went and created a solution to try and help people follow those best practices when minting NFTs on IPFS and Filecoin and make it really, really easy. So it's like that if it's technical overhead or whatever, that should never be an excuse for following best practices to make sure people's data stays super reliable in the network. And so I think like, people can then find their way to how can you have impact against that problem.
And sorry, just for another example, not so radical.
all the NFT marketplaces and minting platforms are kind of aware of the responsibility they have, and they're looking for the best solutions. But how about educating the clientele about this problem? Are they doing the good enough job?
Yeah, I think that's where the marketplace should come in, like as a big player in educating, especially if they're promising something like ownership of an asset. They should be clearly stating what is the measures you have to take to make sure that you are the owner of this. One thing is just owning, like being like a, I don't know, your contract. You mean your Ethereum address owns the contract, the ID of ERC721. And another thing is actually the data that is behind it. So basically, they maybe tell you download it, store it on your computer, then you can spin up your own local node or make an entire solution by IPFS node. I mean, just like a click and propagate so that your friends can always access it and point it. Basically, I think that that's would be a big quest for the marketplace to educate, especially considering that if you are selling something and you are the middleman, you have to be behind what you are promising. If that makes sense.
Have you heard of? Yeah. Have you heard of any? Have you heard of any bad players like who would actually prey on the ignorance of the collectors?
Regarding the data or the ownership? Because I think
ownership.
I'm not actually okay. The ownership is basic. I'm not sure. I haven't followed any hacks, but everyone seems to be following the Open Zeppelin standards, and it's like pretty high quality standards. So, like the ownership, it's unless you don't sign the message of transfer ownership, the function to give it to somebody else, it's like pretty important. So I'm not sure. I haven't seen any like platformers say anything like that stealing ownership. Maybe.
There is, like, for example, I don't know if this speaks to your point, but I may get this example a little bit screwed up, but it's directionally correct. You know, at the moment in which CryptoPunks was wildly popular on Ethereum, I mean, it's still a big deal, but there was that, you know, a few months ago, CryptoPunks was the conversation. Someone copied all the CryptoPunks and listed them on Binance, which there's nothing stopping someone from doing that. And of course, a bunch of people bought them, and maybe they were aware it wasn't really authorized, or maybe they weren't aware, who knows? Maybe they were trying to go for, you know, quick trades as people were kind of confused, but that does seem to be an example of something of a malicious attack. And it raises the question of like and this is a conversation that's happening in crypto right now. I don't want to take us too far afield, but what does it mean to own a thing, right? So for example, Ryder Rips, who's an artist who does stuff in NFTs, he just listed a CryptoPunk on Foundation and got it knocked down from a DMCA notice. And, you know, he's arguing that if you can't resell things or make copies of it, then you don't really own it. Of course, when you buy a DVD, it doesn't mean you can do, you know, commercial showings of a DVD. So there's what does it mean to own things? But I think that is a hot topic in crypto right now. And I think that example of copying NFTs over to another blockchain and selling them as if they're legit is, I don't know if that's precisely on our sort of original point here, but it is an example of a malicious attack on this IP and something for folks to, you know, something for the industry to think about.
Yeah, it's just really interesting. Like, should NFTs include like more legal authority around the thing that you've purchased? Like right now, at least, I was watching an interview with People, and he was like, I, as the creator of this piece of work, retain all of the copyright for it. So when you're buying an NFT, you're buying this, like, really all it is it's a digital receipt with your name on it, with the hash of the thing. And so you have a proof of ownership thing, you have a certificate. That's really it. You know, other than that, you know, the image is, you know, you're not making the image more scarce or anything. Everyone has access to the image as well. It's put on the Ethereum blockchain. Anyone else can fetch it. So really the thing is this ownership receipt, and that's the thing that you're paying for, which is a big deal in of itself. Like, ownership receipts for land go for a lot of money, and it makes perfect sense because you can do things in the world with it, whether that's in a digital world, like something like Decentraland, or whether it's in the physical world, like you can go build a house on it. But like the legal factors that come with purchasing an NFT, like, I don't know, maybe in the future, you'll actually be flowing copyright through NFT purchases, so that as someone who purchases an NFT, you'll also be able to like put it in a museum and charge access for viewing that NFT within that museum. And you as the owner of that NFT will like get the profits from that. Maybe you give your tiny 5% piece to the author who like created that work as well. But like, it seems like that could easily be a direction that we go. It just hasn't been solidified yet in terms of how the traditional legal structure and this new smart contract legal structure fit together in terms of kind of propagating those sorts of rights.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But regarding your point, I think first it will be before the legal. The money will go. So basically, as you mentioned, regarding the like royalties of the reselling of the art. So, if, for example, if I extend the ERC-71 with some functionality that I purchased someone else art, and then whomever rents it or uses this or purchase of me, I'll get if it's done, for example, on Ethereum or any other like EVM compatible Ethereum chain like Polygon or I don't know, like as you mentioned, Binance for the scam I forgot the CryptoPunks. So here. The contracts and the network will basically make sure that I receive my portion of the royalties from the resale of this. Or you could write like a co-ownership of the single asset, and then you have shares of this asset, and the sales from there they'll propagate back to all the owners. So I think that people are experimenting with that already, with like the extending standards, and I'm not sure if they haven't in-depth research, but I think that's really good. And then I think it's when the actual like copyrights and the legal catches the market. I think so.
Well, if anyone's listening to this and is excited about extending these contracts, the one that I'm really interested in is adding this concept of a curator to a collection of NFTs. It's really cool right now that you've enabled all of these digital artists to be able to like sell their work. I've heard of people selling things like research papers and all sorts of really cool stuff. But I'm also really interested in people composing multiple NFTs into a larger collection of NFT works that are around a particular theme. And so now you have the authors of each of those individual pieces. You have maybe the person or persons who are buying them or gaining value from them, and you have the person who assembled them, curated them into that collection. And so you as a particular NFT artist or something don't have to be quite as like self-promotional or prominent if your art is part of like really meaningful collections and it speaks to kind of a wider mission or meme. I have a lot of friends who are musicians, and kind of they don't want to be super like hypey and promotional and build up their own personal brand, but they want their art to speak to people within kind of the messages. And so I think that'd be really interesting as a way of discovering and finding art you care about in kind of like more thematic ways versus more individual kind of like popularity sorts of manners. And so maybe inserting something like a curator role within some of these contracts could be a way to gather these works together and have it less be about an individual and more about a topic or feeling or theme or something like that.
What's the, there is a social network for NFT collectors that Alex Masmej, I can never say his name quite right, is building, which is similar. What's that?
Showtime, right?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yep, I think Showtime is it. So that's right. Getting there. But you know, Molly, to your point, there is, yeah, that is a thing that exists in sort of analog collecting. For example, in comic books, there's a handful, like maybe of a dozen super famous collections, and they're known as like the Cincinnati collection and the Paris collection and whatever, of like very old comic books that if you have a book that comes from one of those collections and that provenance is showable, which it all is in all those cases, because they all, anyway, then it's worth more because it was a part of the, you know, Lexington collection. So yeah, and you could do that a much better way on the blockchain.
And also just regarding the standard you mentioned, actually, that thing is being implemented by some DAOs, but they're governed like by just the ERC-20, and they're basically chipping in, and they're all, I'm not sure what, like, I haven't researched it, but I assume they're doing some sort of like a formal on-chain verification of what asset to purchase, and they're all chipping into, and then they're actually generating like an entire collection of very cool stuff. I'll shut up now and I'll tell you the name of them.
Well, there's like Flamingo DAO, right? So you sort of have that. You can always prove which NFTs were owned, for example, by Flamingo DAO over time. So in a way, you get that curation effect that you were talking about. Molly, at least it passed through this notable wallet. But yeah, you probably could be a little bit more structured about it.
Totally. That's definitely one way of doing it. I think there's something really valuable about like the curation of a collection. And so you can do that, by purchasing and then reselling and just using like everything that has been touched by me is like the thing that I've curated. But I think there's also kind of like, there's so much experience with art in museums and being able to, albums and all of these things is combining together multiple pieces of art with each other. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to kind of evolve some of our data structures, evolve some of the way in which we handle these smart contracts to enable kind of that multi viewership of multiple pieces of NFT works.
And just, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say so, but us as DoinGud, we are addressing your concerns. I could say so, right? So I'm not sure how much I'm allowed.
Amazing,
to say.
Cool.
So.
But how do you actually make sure that this curatorship is not reinforcing the structures which exist in the analog world right now? Because there is lots of critique coming from the artists that the NFT market now are just mirroring what's happening in the art world. They just become gatekeepers, and only the biggest artists sell the artwork for the big buck, and everybody else is supposed to be decentralized and give a chance to everyone, but then it's not really like that. So how do we actually make sure that this new curatorship is actually giving a chance and is changing the industry?
I would say that it's just they're not the only participants in the market, and it's not like they have monopoly. And what Ethereum and brought to us and the ethos is that if like basically there are so many projects, there's so much talent and so much innovations happening. So I think I haven't researched much, but I think that will be hard because if people don't like it, they can fork, copy, take the art, change it. I don't know. It's like very freedomish.
I mean, to me, like what I was describing is actually more taking something that is possible in the art world today and pull it into the NFT world versus trying to like solve for new or existing problems in the art world. I would say like right now you do have the experience of like you as an artist have to be very self-promotional about your brand, about your work, because it's like you, it's your responsibility. The nice thing about a collection is like, there might be the Mona Lisa that pulls people to the Louvre, but then the designers, the curators of the Louvre get to pull in all sorts of other art and content that may not be as prominent, that people may not know about, and they can discover it, find it, decide they love it. Like I decided that I love Botticelli after like going and seeing it randomly, being like, who made this thing? It's beautiful. And so like that's a sort of like spontaneous discovery of things that you can get more with a curated collection than if you're just going on name brand. But it doesn't solve all the problems. It creates a new set of problems as well, for sure.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to ever get to the point when rich people aren't going to make things expensive, at least not anytime soon. I'm sensitive to that complaint, but I also I think some of the artists who complain about it stop complaining when they sell things for a lot of money. One thing that this industry has done is, it wasn't a traditional art buyer who bought the Beeple collection. It was a crypto rich guy. It is bringing a new set of buyers into the space. Maybe they're still making, crazy, 1% up gains for, just a certain small set, but that is sort of how the world has always worked. So, at least there's more people coming in, and it is a new category of buyers and a new separate market. It doesn't seem like there's any signs that the people who are spending lots of money on NFTs are the same people who spent lots of money on paintings and sculptures. So it's expanding in some way, but the world changes slowly.
And there's a whole new set of things that can be NFTs that like didn't fall into the previous like art world mold, right? So like I have a friend who minted a research paper as product of this research you did, and then was able to sell that NFT to someone who wanted to sponsor that sort of research work. So it's kind of this certificate of impact sort of thing where like the work was already done, but I care about you, the results that you came to, want to fund more work of that kind. So I'll purchase the outcome of your work in order to fund you to go and do the next thing. And I think that's a really interesting model, like seeing this for funding science, seeing this for funding. I think someone was there was like a tree DAO sort of thing with like tree NFTs within a park, so you could like buy the tree and talk about its like upkeep and contribute the resources from buying it back to kind of like the ecological care of that particular park. I think it was in London or something like that, somewhere in England. And so like there's all sorts of things that are getting recognized and put into this model that are like a little bit thinking outside the box. And so we're seeing it on both sides, both new people coming into the space and new works flowing through kind of what an NFT can be.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully there will be a new role soon, which is NFT curator, which would be actually, you know, a bit different to the curator in the analog world. Nikita, were you about to say something? Or did you just, I saw you waving. But come the subject of storage, and we were discussing lots of exciting and promising IPFS solutions. But I was just wondering is there such an option to keep it completely pure and actually store the actual art on the blockchain, or would we then have the consequence of the environmental issues here?
No, sorry, you go.
I was going to say it's technically feasible to store content on the blockchain. It's just not advisable or scalable to do so. If you say have, I don't remember how large that NFT, the Beeple NFT was, but it was like very large. It had many, many images all stitched together at an amazing detail. Like I'm imagining, many like gigabytes worth of space. Now imagine encoding all of that into Ethereum, forcing every single node in order to like replicate that state and hold on to all of that data in the long term. Like that's expensive, and that's wasteful for everyone to constantly be like shuttling that around. And so using solutions that give you the best of both worlds so that you can scale your kind of computing network and also have reliable distributed storage, I think really kind of go hand in hand.
And just to add on that, because we're in DoinGud, we are doing this thing is basically as we see as there's a little gap between the Ethereum or Polygon or the chain on chain, at least on chain. So some projects, they can put metadata, they can encode it and store it within the contract, and you can retrieve it directly. For example, the magician I bought, his properties, like the different, like the props he has, like abilities, they're all encoded and stored on chain, on the Ethereum contract. So that is like, it's there. It's like, you cannot change it. I mean, you can change it if you can call the method, but you have to do something. Like basically you have to be owner. Basically, there are some restrictions depending on how the code is written. And what we are, and the data that, for example, the media as a Beeple media, which weighs a lot of gigabytes, to store it on chain, it will be very costly to pay as like gas fees, because the storage is, and then you raise the ethical question, the Molly raised this regarding like you make every single node, like basically the size of the node would increase by like a couple %, because I think right now it's terabytes. It's the light clients, and then they'll increase it. But yeah, it's not very ethical. So people are looking at solutions to store it outside, and the IPFS comes in. And for example, what we are implementing and DoinGud, we are using ceramic network. So it's basically, it uses the IPFS under the hood to the store, but since IPFS has some limitation to the use cases that we need, for example, once you store an asset, if you modify the hash that is publicly available, it changes. So therefore, and the contract, it points to a given hash. So for example, to change the hash, you need to change the contract pointing to this address. And to change it, then it means you have to pay Ether or whatever, like Matic or whatever chain you're on, you have to pay the fee to change the hash. So for example, the ceramic, it allows you to have a persistent hash. So for example, you change the content, so the image can be changed, or the metadata, for example, the properties of an asset can be changed, but it's publicly available at the same URL, let's say. And also another key point is that key feature there allows that we are like very happy to integrate, is basically the role ownership. We author basically it's a three. It's called like a 3 ID. So it's basically edification, IDX, I think it's called, right? So that you authenticate with your wallet. For example, if you're in case of MetaMask, you just sign the message to the node. You don't publish anything. You just cryptographic proof that you are the owner of this address, and you are, for example, sending some. Basically, the IDX then has the ability to check that it's you, and then you can override this document, override this data, and then you can play go from there to kind of prove that how the file has been changed over time, who changed it, who has the right to change it, who can access it, who cannot access it, if it's public in the public. So basically, it's like a Ceramic provides this layer of. Yeah, maybe Molly could explain.
Ceramic's awesome. I absolutely love that team. They do really, really amazing work. And yeah, the kind of thing you're describing here is great. You have the core content addressing of IPFS, but this is layering things around kind of like identity and naming on top of that, so that you can use DIDs in order to describe who has things like write permissions to a particular file, and then you using kind of this I think they use IPNS, but some sort of kind of mutable kind of public-private key way of updating documents over time, so that it's still all content address primitives under the hood, but that you can change the pointer of kind of what is the head of that document at any period in time, so you can see the history, but you can also have like a mutable copy that you're you as say the owner. I don't actually know how you guys use it in your particular NFT case, but this is the sort of thing that you'd want for kind of like a more mutable NFT that's evolving over time, so that you can see the entire kind of like content addressed history, but that the head can keep changing as it's parsing new data in the ecosystem, or you as the owner are like adding new information that'll like evolve or modify your NFT, which is, like, I think, super cool.
Like how Git works. Yeah. I mean, and to speak to the question of sort of a way to do it, I do sort of think it's kind of I think people are overthinking this point a little bit. If you have a cryptographic hash that points to a thing that's stored in multiple places, I feel like that's basically the same as being on the blockchain, really. I mean, it's demonstrably provable that that's the thing. One example I would give is, there's a younger project out there called Arweave. They promise to store things forever. Forever is a pretty long time, and they've only been around for like 4 years. So who knows if that promise is good, but that, they function somewhat similarly to how Filecoin works. They do cryptographic hashing and things like that. So, so that is an option, but again, that is just sort of incentivizing people to store it. It's not, quote unquote, on the blockchain. But I just don't really know that once you understand how cryptography solves these things, I just don't know that that is super important in the end.
And these solutions we're discussing now, so Ceramic Network, or did you say Arweave, Brady?
Arweave, just Arweave, not Arweave, yeah.
Yeah. So,
no
are we confident to call these solutions decentralized?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, sure. And there's a lot of other blockchains are starting to get into the NFT space too. Tezos is super into it, Near is super into it. So we're going to see a lot of other possibilities come along in this area soon. They aren't very big markets on those yet, but they will come, and that'll be interesting as well.
Fantastic. I don't know if anybody wants to ask any individual questions to each other.
Well, I am curious to Molly, I just mentioned the other blockchains. Is IPFS and Filecoin doing much work to help back things up on sites like Tezos and Near and others who are, I feel like Polkadot is getting kind of into NFTs too. So yeah. What are you seeing in those other blockchains?
Totally. Like we see so much activity on the Ethereum space, but does a disservice to all of these other really amazing chains that are doing great work as well. Textile actually just released a really awesome integration with Near, where they added all sorts of, they added like a storage oracle, which I'm calling a storacle because it's fun, where it allows you to have these like store functions directly within the Near blockchain so that you can store content, and then it backs up all of that data onto IPFS and Filecoin. And so that's like effectively adding an off-chain storage layer to the smart contracts within Near itself, which is super cool. I think VideoCoin is also a cool example where they're doing all sorts of video NFTs and have done kind of a deep integration with Filecoin in order to store and back all that up. Chainlink, I think, does a whole ton of like cross chain bridging work, effectively making it really easy to kind of like write and design oracles that go across different chains and do kind of that bridging function. And I think they mostly were focusing on Ethereum initially, but work across different platforms. And so yeah, it's definitely expanding. I think it's a huge area of opportunity. I would be super excited to see more work happening, say with like Matic/Polygon or other groups like that, to make it really accessible kind of within smart contracts or maybe within NFTs themselves, to make it more easy for them to do as part of the minting function, also kind of allocate resources towards storing it. I think that could be a really interesting way, as you were saying, to kind of encode more best practices by default, so that everyone can follow some kind of good rails. And so those are some of the ones that I know about, but I'm sure there's a ton that I don't know about, because the space is just expanding really quickly, and people are jumping on and creating new stuff. Like, I didn't even know about DoinGud and that it was using Ceramic and IPFS under the hood, which is super cool. I know that the Ceramic mainnet happened just a couple of weeks ago, and so there's like probably a whole ton of new groups there that are doing all sorts of cool integrations that I'm still to learn about.
Yep.
Nikita, you probably have more visibility into that than we do, but I'm curious what your experience has been kind of building on top of Ceramic and applying those things to your challenges, which is super cool.
As you said, they recently just have a mainnet. So as you can imagine, we've been working prior to that. So yeah, that's been a lot of hurdles. But yeah, since the tech is, as you said, everything moves so fast here and today. But yeah, I would say the ID, as you mentioned, is a very cool concept, and I think there has many applications. Their role ownerships and everything. And yeah, regarding like I don't know if that's like your question, like regarding like the documentation and the community on Discord, they're always helpful answering questions. Always the team seems really nice, and yeah, so thanks to them. So I don't know if that's answered your question.
Totally does.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. And they have lots of cool blog posts, like examples of off-chain voting and stuff like that. Where they basically make you think of different implementation, because as you said, there are so many different ways to architect something that's it's like coming up with the right solution, especially like to fill the missing blocks, and like you take yeah, that's another source of information. Inspiration.
It's interesting how flexible this world is. CoinDesk did a little experiment for its consensus conference this year, where we gave people tokens that they could do different things with, called Desk. And we did it all on the, actually on the Ethereum testnet is where we ran it all, because that made it all free and nothing was really worth anything. But we worked with a company I want to give a shout out to, Unifty. They were really cool. They helped us do everything on the Ethereum testnet, but they also set it up so that if people really liked their NFT and wanted to feel like they reliably owned it, they could move it over to Ethereum in a provenance preserving way. They'd have to pay to do that. They'd pay the gas. It's not like a ton of money, but sometimes it's expensive. But so that was cool, and it just goes to speak to the composability and the flexibility of this space. With using all these open standards, you can move things around, you can bounce them around. You can mix things up in ways that just don't exist in the centralized world. That was really cool. So yeah, Unifty did a great job with that. And I think they're just one of many people solving some of these problems for folks and making it cool and fun, exciting to play with this technology.
So I should ask a question. So actually, I'm not sure if it's a question, but prior to this talk, Brady, I ended up reading your article on CoinDesk, just as saying, because the Google search query input led me to your article. So
yeah, great, thanks. I was that was a decently popular post. I was I knew it was an important topic, but I was a little bit surprised at the number of people who were into it in the end. But yeah, it was fun to dig into that.
And thumbs up to Molly and Juan Bennett for basically getting me into this. It's Vitalik and Juan who made me go code. back in like 5 years ago.
That's
I saw his
amazing.
talk. Yeah.
Two very interesting guys.
And I saw
Very
their
inspiring.
talk about IPFS, and my head kept buzzing because, yeah, as you can imagine, from my origin, I'm very concerning about their censorship-resistant architecture. So that's important, I think, aspect. And
Just for listeners, in case they don't know, he's talking about Vitalik Buterin, which you probably do know, in founder of Ethereum, and then Juan Benet, who is super well known,
it's great
but not.
to have guests who inspire each other. And definitely, it's very exciting space to watch.
I think you're having some delay, Anya.
Yes, sorry about it, but yeah, go on, Brady. You were talking about Vitalik.
I said who Vitalik was, and Juan Benet is the founder of Filecoin and IPFS and a bunch of things, but super well known too. But some folks might not automatically know who Juan is. So yeah, another fascinating guy who has also interested me for a long time too.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your contribution. It's been very exciting discussion. And when we were talking about the curation, and we were saying that probably there is a new job role to come on in this space, then Molly texted me individually saying that actually also there will be new type of sellers, right, on the market as well. So next week we actually have a podcast about different approaches and techniques when it comes to NFT creation. So while this has been very exciting, I would like to invite everyone for next week podcast, which is going to happen same day, date and time. And until then, thank you so much, Molly. Thank you, Brady, and thank you, Nikita. And have a wonderful week, everyone. Thank you so much.
Peace.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Nice meeting.